Cambridge, and welcome to What's That About, where we answer all your questions of the pressing issues of the day, brought to you by CCTV, Cambridge's TV station to the stars.
Cambridge has stars? You mean like Matt Damon?
No, Julie, plenty of real stars, like Greg, the bartender at the Cellar, or Garvey, the bartender at the Parlor, the Harvard Square Turkeys, or the shouty guy in the Central Square Tea Stop. Creepy pedophile-adjacent Larry Summers and Alan Dershowitz.
All right. Our first question comes to us from the shouty guy at the Central Square Tea Stop. Shouty guy says, I, like 72% of my fellow electorate, voted for an audit of Beacon Hill way back in 2024. Why haven't I heard anything about the results of the audit since?
That's a really good question, shouty guy in the Central Square Tea Stop. To recap, voters of Massachusetts passed a law authorizing the state auditor to audit the legislature by a wide margin, but Speaker for Life Ron Mariano and President for Life Karen Spilka have simply refused to allow that. Why is that, Julie? Is it because Beacon Hill is an opaque, corrupt hellhole where no one knows what goes on and the leadership wants to keep it that way?
Well, the legislature rarely talks about the audit, but when pressed, their official excuse is that the law is unconstitutional. The Senate and House at first dragged their feet responding to Dizoglio's request for documents with procedural questions, and now seem to simply be ignoring her totally.
Has anyone other than people who hate the idea of transparency, like Mariano and Spilka, officially ruled the audit unconstitutional? You know, like a judge in a court of law or something like that?
Well, Attorney General Andrea Campbell has refused to defend the law in court, so it hasn't even reached the state Supreme Court yet.
Huh.
But that could also be because the AG is dependent on the legislature for extra funding she wants to fight the federal government in court.
Oh, so it's like an episode of The Sopranos. Sure, we'll fund your lawsuits you want to do, but first I need you to do me just a little favor.
That's the way it seems, but it's hard to tell for sure because
Beacon Hill is an opaque, corrupt hellhole where no one knows how or why anything gets done.
Right. In fact, in the absence of progress on Beacon Hill, Auditor Dizoglio took her case directly to the people of Cambridge on November 19th, holding a town hall in Porter Square to discuss the status of the audit.
Oh, cool. How did that happen? I bet some really smart people put that town hall together, right?
I don't know how smart they are, but the Cambridge Community for Transparency and Accountability hosted the town hall to give the auditor the opportunity to update everyone and answer questions on her fight for the audit, talk about her next steps, and what the people can do to fight for Beacon Hill accountability.
In the interests of transparency, we should say that some guy who looks very much like me is part of the CCTA, the group that hosted the event. And that very handsome fellow moderated the town hall with Diana.
Handsome is doing a lot of work there. Anyways, at the event, covered by local Boston Channel 5 and CCTV, Dizoglio didn't pull her punches, saying the speaker and president were acting like a king or queen, and that the legislature was behaving like a cult, walking in lockstep behind them.
Speaker rules and reigns the state of Massachusetts, just like a king. Senate president rules and reigns over Massachusetts, just like a queen.
Huh. And I noticed that the auditor, like What's That About on a previous show, took note of Ron Mariano's answer to a question about why the House wasn't complying with the audit law by saying compliance is in the eye of the beholder, implying he can pretty much do what he wants and ignore the law.
Well, with respect to the law, folks, compliance is in the eye of the beholder. Basically, a do you know who I am statement from the Speaker of the House.
Right. Also, when Channel 5 gave Senator for Life Spilka a chance to respond the next day during their On the Record show, she said this.
What's your response to that?
She has no idea what happens in the Senate. And that's very unfortunate.
She's a former senator.
Which she still has no idea, or she's totally forgotten, to be honest with you.
Note that Senator Spilka is unable to answer Dizoglio's remarks with any substance, using the line, she has no idea what happens in the Senate, which the interviewer rightly calls her on, noting that Diana Dizoglio is a former senator herself.
Well, this exchange of zingers from the auditor and the leaders for life of the legislature sure is entertaining, but it really doesn't get us any closer to accountability. Do the people of this great commonwealth have to just sit back and take open contempt from their elected officials? There's no way to force a legislature to at least answer in court?
Well, some people are trying. Wayland Selectman Ann Brensley, who's a Republican running for lieutenant governor, has brought a lawsuit in Middlesex Superior Court aiming to force Beacon Hill to comply.
Wait, anyone can just sue the legislature to try to get them to follow the law? Why haven't I done that?
Not just anyone. Under the state's public right doctrine, citizens can sue to enforce government duties only when they can demonstrate a clear interest. As the Fall River Reporter noted in their November 16th article on Brensley, in this case, the selectman is arguing that because she is running for lieutenant governor, she needs to understand the state's expenditures, and because Beacon Hill is refusing to provide audit materials that could show misuse of taxpayer funds, this is putting her at a disadvantage versus incumbents.
Well, that actually seems like a pretty good argument for standing. I mean, it's interesting that support for the audit seems to be so widespread across the political spectrum. I mean, everyone from famously progressive and handsome Cambridge voters to Republican candidates for state office are trying to push Beacon Hill to open their books to the state auditor. You'd think the legislatures would get the message that the people's push for transparency isn't just going to go away anytime soon. So what advice did Diana give to handsome Cambridge voters on what they can do best to continue the fight, Julie?
Well, ironically, she suggested backing a push for 2 more transparency-based questions on the 2026 ballot. Beacon Hill's stipend reform, which will cut down on the ability of Speaker Mariano and President Spilka to dole out hundreds of thousands of dollars in patronage to their toadies for no actual work, and the Beacon Hill Public Records Law, which would make the legislature and governor's office subject to the state public records law like every other official in state and local government. Dizoglio said these would do even more to bring transparency and accountability to the State House than the audit.
Yeah, voters seem pretty angry at Beacon Hill in general, as there's a record 12 ballot questions, some progressive, some definitely not so progressive, that are moving on towards the next round of signature gathering. It seems like the opacity and historic ineffectiveness of the state legislature is driving people of all political stripes to the referendum process to have their voices heard. What has to happen next before the transparency questions get on the ballot, Julie?
Once the questions are officially filed on January 7th, each petition will move to the legislature, where legislators will have a chance to pass the measure themselves. File this under unlikely. Once Beacon Hill sits on the measures as expected, round 2 of signature gathering begins in May and ends on July 1st, where 12,000 plus more signatures must be filed for each question.
So people of Cambridge, if you too are worked up because Beacon Hill is an opaque, corrupt hellhole where no one knows what goes on behind closed doors, you can get out this May and join groups like the CCTA, boop, and gather more signatures to ensure the Beacon Hill Public Records Law and stipend reform get on the ballot.
And keep watching What's That About?, where we will continue to report on the fight to bring transparency and accountability to Beacon Hill. Until next week.
We'll see you first.